and welcome to today's webinar, the third in our series featuring partners in development. I wish to thank you in advance for your time and for your interest in today's topic, and that's on demystifying partnerships to enable competitive advantage. My name is Penina Lam, and I'm a consultant at CGAP, and I'll be moderating the session today. Our series of webinars allow professionals like you to hear from leading experts in digital learning and capacity building. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by a panel from Gateway Academy, Bivee and Humentum. I would now like to start with a question that our panelists will help us to answer. How do you go about developing and launching a digital learning platform for Sub-Saharan Africa's financial institutions? Faced with this challenge, Gateway Academy's strategy demanded an innovative approach to procurement, strategy, and operations. What's unique about today's webinar, unlike the last two that we've had so far under this series, is the consortium-based partnership approach. You will learn how this came to be, what the consortium supports, and how it supports digital learning, and gain insights on some competitive advantages that such a partnership approach presents. A few logistical items that I would like to review as we get started to help us through this session. Please note that this is an audio broadcast, and so your microphone will remain muted during the entire session. However, I welcome you to engage with us by posting your comments and/or questions at any time during the presentation. Please use the chat function on the right-hand side of your screen and select all participants from the drop-down menu, and we'll be monitoring this space throughout. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be mailed to all participants in a couple of days' time. So I'm happy to welcome to you the featured panelists who are the consortium partners, and they have all been part of the Gateway Academy journey to date. Working as one team, the consortium has been involved in planning, designing, and launching the digital learning marketplace. And they continue to support the daily operations working with all stakeholders. This includes Gateway Academy teams, training service providers, and financial institutions in all the 7 countries where we work. They will share their personal and also their organizational experiences and insights into what they have learned about partnerships. I'm now very pleased to introduce our panel. Tom Sinclair is our Senior Operations Officer at CGAP, and he's also the CEO of Gateway Academy. Chris Pro is the Global Director for Learning and Product Development at Humentum, and Scott Shafter is the Managing Director of Bivee. Again, I'm Penina Lam, and I'll be your moderator throughout the session. Just to give you a preview of what you can expect, in this webinar, we will cover the following topics. I'll give you a brief introduction to Gateway Academy and CGAP for those who are not familiar with our work. And then Tom will join me in presenting about the challenges related to capacity building in the financial inclusion sector and also around technology procurement. He'll speak about the competitive dialogue process that led to the consortium partnership. Later on, Chris and Scott will address how the consortium-based partnership facilitates strategic, technical, and operational support to financial institutions. They'll speak about the importance of shaping the project culture and how agile design thinking and customer-centric approaches have helped inform our process and products. Later on, all the panelists will join me in speaking about the key lessons they have learned about partnerships, and we'll also join in the Q&A towards the end, and I really invite you to note down and send in your questions as we go along. So a little bit about the Gateway Academy for those who may not be familiar with our work. Digital Academy is a digital learning platform focused on financial inclusion. We focus on improving staff performance in a rapidly changing financial inclusion industry. And we do so by connecting financial institutions with leading training providers to offer cutting-edge learning solutions. Gateway Academy is a product of the collaboration between the CGAP, that's a consultative group to assist the poor, and the MasterCard Foundation. And I really want to welcome you to the Gateway Academy website to learn more. Without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Tom Sinclair from CGAP and Gateway, who will walk us through some of the capacity building challenges that led to Gateway Academy's work and the Consortium partnership. Thank you. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Panina. So Panina just gave you a description of Gateway Academy, and I'd like us to step back for just a moment and look at how we got where we got to. So, thank you, Panina. Give me the slides. All right. So a few years ago, we understood that there was a capacity gap in the financial inclusion sector, specifically among financial service providers. And we knew that we could close this gap using digital learning. So the first question was where to start. So Gateway Academy is designed to be a spinoff and designed to be self-sustaining. So it had to be a market facilitator working on both the supply and the demand sides, developing digital content with leading training providers, and building trust and confidence for digital learning among financial service providers. So we developed a marketplace on both the supply and the demand sides, and that was the focus of our last two webinars, as Panina mentioned. But how did we get here? Our journey began by looking at the capacity building challenge. We had then to figure out how to bring together a knowledgeable collaborative partners. And together with those partners, we developed a flexible, adaptive management approach. And we continued to develop broader partnerships and collaborations. So as we looked at the capacity building sector, specifically in financial inclusion, we knew that we had some challenges. We wanted to invest in capacity building at scale through digital learning, and it needed to have low barriers to usage for a variety of financial service providers. We wanted to bring together various training providers with different content, and we needed to make training available to users globally in a cost-effective manner. We wanted to extend CGAP's learning with new providers, and we needed to identify viable digital capacity building models. So there was a business case here for capacity building in this sector, and in their 2017 report, FSD Africa highlighted some of those factors that inhibit capacity building in the financial sector. And these included the cost of face-to-face delivery channels, the lack of access to expertise in new areas of operation, high levels of staff rotation, and the lack of measurable results. These factors informed our overall approach to our work, and we've built Gateway Academy to address these and demonstrate a persuasive business case for capacity building investments. But we couldn't do this alone, and the next question was, how do we bring on knowledgeable collaborative partners to support this? There were a number of things we needed to think about as we went through this process. So we needed to navigate the procurement process in a large bureaucracy like the World Bank, where CGAP is housed. We needed to understand how we handled intellectual property rights of training providers in a public institution. We needed to bring on a partner that would supplement our own skills, a knowledgeable partner knowledgeable in digital learning, pedagogy, and user experience. And we needed to think how to best extend our team to meet the unique objectives of Gateway Academy. So from the beginning, the team at CGAP was continuously learning and adapting. We were intentional about bringing on a partner that thought and worked like us, that was collaborative, knowledgeable, and that would complement and enhance and enlarge our team. So as we managed this internal procurement process at the World Bank, we worked with some creative procurement staff who advised us to enter into a competitive dialogue process. So a competitive dialogue process is this interactive, multi-stage procurement selection arrangement that allows for dynamic engagement with proposers. And what that means is that it is a way to engage with bidders interactively and creatively through the process. And it would allow us to get to the type of partner that we wanted to work with. So there are four main stages in this process. There's the REI, the request for expression of interest. There's the competitive dialogue at the heart of this. There is the RFP stage, and then the evaluation and selection. So in the expression of interest phase, we had about 20 applicants And as we went through that process, we were able to narrow down to 3 proposers. We invited them into the competitive dialogue process. The competitive dialogue process took many months. It began with us delivering our objectives for the project to all of the proposers. They then came back and presented to us with clarifying questions. Then they brought their final proposal to us that we then turned into an RFP and gave back to all 3 proposers. Those RFPs came back to the committee. They were evaluated against our criteria, and we awarded the contract. And in a couple other stages after that, of course, we negotiated with the vendor. We went through a legal review, and then we started the contract. There are a couple highlights of learning that came out of this process. Again, it was a very creative process, and so we had some creative procurement specialists at the World Bank. But it was a rigorous process. Again, it was lengthy, but it also allowed us to continue to engage with the proposers over multiple months. And that's why we had many dialogues throughout that phase. And we were able to engage with the stakeholders in a different way that you can't do in a regular procurement process. And it allowed us to think about different options and to explore new ways of working. We didn't stop at no. We continued to explore the maybes and to get to a yes. And while we were engaging in this process, we were continuing to do research, build partnerships, and engage stakeholders. So we commissioned a content demand study. We did assessments with our partners, both on the supply side and the demand side. We held in-country workshops and meetings in 7 focus countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We held a key collaboration and co-creation workshop with all of our initial partners. We developed and executed baseline and inline surveys with learners as we tested. We continuously held ongoing conversations with diverse stakeholders. We had design sprints with local technology partners and local, and financial service providers. And we worked to build the capacity of our training providers to inform content digitization and business modeling. And with all of this going on, we wanted to keep asking ourselves as a team at CGAP, how could we develop a flexible, adaptive management approach? We wanted to develop an approach that would encompass strategy, design and development, and operations. And at this point, I'll hand it off to my colleague from Humentum, Chris Prue, to take you through the next steps.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Yes, I'm going to pick up here and kind of give a little bit of perspective of the consortium partners and what it was like to engage in the competitive dialogue process, and then how that turned into an ongoing sort of adaptive and agile project process. So as Tom mentioned, they were looking for a partner who could really help them across 3 key critical areas: the ability to look at strategy, the ability to help them at the core of building a digital learning platform, which is the design and development pillar in the middle. But also because this was going to be a spin-off and this was going to be an organization that was ultimately achieving self-sustainability, the key was also to say, okay, well, how do we actually support also the operations of running a digital learning organization that was going to live on beyond the capacity development program in the first stages. So the first thing that was obvious is that the best way that we felt to respond to those 3 needs of strategy, design and development, and operations was to, in fact, work in a consortium with partners who were bringing skills across that. It was going to be quite challenging, for any one organization to assemble the right team and be able to effectively address all 3 of those pillars. And in the process of building this team, and includes my colleague Scott from Bivee, who will be on here in a second, and a third firm, Paradigm, who really focused a lot on the technological software development side. It was obvious to us as well is that these skills were not just in each of us individually as an organization, but as individuals as people. And one of our goals in entering the competitive dialogue process was to engage with the CGAP and the Gateway Academy team and present sort of this kind of consolidated team and sort of in some ways blur the lines between our 3 organizations and say, okay, collectively we are one stronger team. What was really interesting about the competitive dialogue process, as Tom indicated also, was it gave us the opportunity to kind of weigh in right from the very beginning, through that RFI process, and we got that initial look at what they were looking for in terms of features and functionality. We saw some gaps in all three of these pillars that allowed us to respond and help Gateway build iteratively towards the best solution. And we felt that even if in the end we wouldn't win the competitive dialogue process, we felt like even from the beginning we were helping to sort of shape what this project would look like, especially in that sort of strategy and design and development piece. And so it was quite refreshing really from our side to participate in this compared to a traditional RFP process where all you can do is sort of respond blindly to the requirements from the organizations who've put the tender out. And so this ability to engage in that competitive dialogue process, learn more about the goals and outcomes, allowed us to focus our solution on goals and outcomes as opposed to just ticking the boxes in the RFP. So one of the things that was exciting to us about this project is that, in fact, the team at Gateway was already moving down the line of thinking about how do we build this project in a really agile way? How do we actually understand what the customer was actually looking for? And that was what we thought was a key differentiator to how we felt like we needed to work on this project for it to be successful. There were many unknowns as we were entering this process, even though a lot of research had already been done in terms of what kind of solution was actually going to resonate with the market. And if this thing was going to be sustainable in the long run, how do you market it? How do you price it? How do you deliver some of those services in a capacity building area in a sector that was relatively undeveloped? So we very quickly kind of centered on collectively, this idea of bringing a sort of an agile development process to it, which in development speak sometimes is also referred to as adaptive management. And so it was really adopting a Silicon Valley approach that had been used in developing, software and apps in a very kind of pure technological sense, but adapting that to a multi-year capacity building project and adapting it to a whole set of functions which were not about building the platform. It was bringing the same approach to the strategy and operations and marketing that we were also bringing to the development of the actual platform itself. And this approach works best in situations like this, in environments where there is a tremendous amount of uncertainty about the outcomes, tremendous amount of uncertainty about how the customer is going to respond, changing customer and audience dynamics. And so this was, in some ways, a really good fit and allowed us to really engage quite well with the stakeholders in the process already. One of the key insights, however, about using this process is you really do need to accept that unlike a traditional project, you're not really optimizing for the first iteration. Our goal wasn't to necessarily deliver a complete solution with the first course or the first learner experiences on the platform. Our goal was to get something into the market as quickly as possible, accepting that it may not be quite right, because the goal of getting into the market as quickly as possible was to engage with customers, find out the pieces where we needed to iterate, and build a process to be right over the long haul. And I think my colleague Scott here is going to pick up and talk a little bit about how we supported that through a cultural piece, but also what some of the outcomes of that approach were. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Scott at this point.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so as Chris mentioned, there's a lot of advantages to building an agile culture and building, whatever it might be, software, capacity building programs with an agile approach. It works well in a number of contexts, and it's not incredibly hard to build that kind of approach. It's not rocket science. There's a number of small steps that I'll kind of share that we applied, and I'll share some suggested reading if you want to learn more about how to do this in your context. I think the biggest thing is to start from the outset and be consciously aware that you are building culture in everything that you do. And it's happening even if you don't intentionally try and build it. And so being thoughtful about what are the values, what are the approaches that you want to build into your culture from the outset, because that will dramatically impact your ability to actually execute on Agile. A lot of it stems around transparency, accountability, shared trust. And so one of the things that we did when we began was we had a large kickoff with all the different members who are working on the project and came together as one team and set joint team goals, joint team values, joint team metrics of accountability. So we ceased to be individual companies, people working at the World Bank, at different organizations, and became the Gateway Academy team. And from the outset, we began to refer to ourselves as that, began to build a brand and a culture around the fact that we were working on Gateway Academy, and the fact that we happened to wear other hats and other contexts didn't really matter. So building that culture is incredibly important. A big part of that is building transparency into the process so that people know what is happening where. There's a number of ways to do that. Technology helps. We were able to use Slack, which is essentially a chat room, so people can see what people are talking about in different contexts. So if I want to weigh in on operations, and I have some insight from the technology components that I'm working on, I can see that there's a conversation happening there and can weigh in without needing to be CC'd into all the different things that are occurring. Google Drive we use to allow for people to collaborate on documents and be able to find documents easily. Because it's a distributed team, we use Zoom and Mural, which are tools to allow people to collaborate online. And so technology helps, but a lot of it is just the process. And we built cross-functional teams or sprint teams, which are basically groups of people that were, disassociated from their organizations and focused on a particular task. So for example, we had training service provider sprint teams, where we'd look at how do we engage with these training service providers to build courses that are effective for the market? What are the technology considerations? What are the pedagogical considerations? And really trying to focus on a particular problem. And each of those teams involved members from the whole Gateway Academy team. So members from CGAP, from the World Bank, Humentum, Bivee, Paradigm, and different consultants as needed as well. A big piece of it too, and part of the principles of Agile, is breaking things down into shorter units of work that you can have a clear outcome or a clear shippable unit. So basically, in software, this might be a feature. So now you didn't have a blue button. After 2 weeks, you do. But this can also be considered for things like, just taking a course from concept to storyboards, or any particular functional unit of work, so you can be clear on what you're trying to achieve and then test it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is building in these moments of reflection. So at the end of each of these 2-week sprints, we would take a little bit of time to reflect on the process. So what worked well? Were we meeting too much, not enough? Were things getting lost? Was Slack not working? And we were able to adapt just how we were working together to be able to, after each sprint, improve the way that we engage with each other. And then also having these larger moments of reflection on a quarterly basis and kind of reassessing what are the hypotheses that we're trying to achieve. So we've learned a lot in a quarter. What needs to change in a macro perspective? And then I think similar to that, when you're trying to talk about these moments of reflections and when things haven't gone as well as you thought, or are different than the hypothesis you're trying to validate, or whatever it might be, it's incredibly important to focus on the work and the problems and not the people, because sometimes it's easy to worry that there's going to be blame placed, but it's not about that. Things are not going to work. That's just the way things go, particularly with the degrees of uncertainty that many times we face in the work that we're taking on. And so realizing that and accepting that and working together to say, hey, you know what, this outcome wasn't what we expected. How do we build a solution to that together? Kind of in tandem to that, not being afraid to throw things away. Similar to that, you'll do things that don't work. You'll try a new feature. You'll test something. If you're able to have the metrics and the insights behind what's happening and you learn something from that, it's not a waste. It's insights. And it's many times it's good to throw things away that aren't working. Keeping a product simple, keeping a service simple, and taking out the cruft of things that are not actually working, many times can be more effective. But it's hard to throw things away because you've put so much work and effort into it. So I think these are some of the key insights around what it means to build an Agile culture and implement Agile in your organization. Here are some books that we recommend that if you're interested in reading more, these are kind of the, best in the Agile context. Some of it's startup-based, some of it's technological. I'll leave the slide here for a couple minutes, but you can always come back to it on the recording if you're interested in looking at any of these, but they're all very helpful. One with that, I'll just talk briefly about some of the considerations around building the platform for this market, or really any market. So the main thing is that many times the core functionality of what you're trying to build is not dramatically different from other systems. You know, the core goal of an online learning platform is to deliver content to people online. But a lot of times you get caught up in offering more and more and more features. Somebody wants, you know, a quiz that does a spinning quiz widget or whatever it might be. And you continue to add on more and more and more without thinking about the why and how does it help people achieve the goals that they're trying to get out of using that system. And focusing on design and mobile first and mobile centric approaches to make sure that you're delivering the right context in the simplest way where people are now is really key. So it's less about building some new novel functionality. Many times it's just about building it right for the people that you are building it for. And that was very much our ethos. It was the ethos of the CGAP team coming into this, and really embodying this build with your users throughout the entire process is so critical, because this drives everything and needs to be the core of everything you're doing. Being customer centric, being focused on your users is just entirely key. You're not the expert. You might have some opinions, you might have some thoughts, but ultimately you're not the one that will be using this day in, day out. And similar to that, making sure that you're building to the context specific requirements of that particular environment. So if you're you know, building in a particular geography, making sure that your content is relevant to that, or that the way that you're delivering it is relevant to that context. So if people are using their phones to access the content, using their phones. If they're using their desktop, using their desktop, or making sure that it fits into where they're at, as opposed to forcing them to come to you. And then I think fundamentally, it's not about the technology per se or the content, it's about the whole experience. You know, when you show up at an airport, or you take a plane, or any real experience, there's components that are technology, that are people, that are content, and it's about that overarching experience. You know, you might use the technology to check into your flight, but if somebody at the gate treats you badly, the experience is going to be bad, even if the app that you use to check into your flight or whatever was great. So it's really about focusing on the entire experience and making sure that you get the end-to-end experience right, and not just focusing on one piece. So I think that's mostly it. I think we'll talk a little bit now about lessons learned, and I'll pass it back to Tom to kick that off.
Thank you, Scott. Actually, I think we're passing it back to Penina. Is that right, Penina? Yep.
That's right. Thank you, Tom, and Chris and Scott. Thank you so much for such an interesting and informative presentation. So in a way, I'll kick off our Q&A before we get to all your questions, which I kindly want to remind you to please enter them through the chat function. I would like to pose a question for our panelists to walk us through in the next few minutes. And my question is, what are some of the lessons you've learned about partnerships and also working with external vendors and industry partners? And to start us off, Tom, would you please share with us your insights around lessons learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are so many from this project, and I think that we're thinking about how we continue to document that. And as we've mentioned, we've done some of this already in the webinars that we have been doing, and we have a few more coming up. We're also looking at doing it through a blog series. But if I think, you know, right now about the three that I think are most stand out to me right now. One would be the importance of managing expectations and stakeholder needs, especially in a bureaucracy where we're sitting. So just to take us back, CGAP is housed at the World Bank, and right now Gateway Academy is housed at CGAP. So it's a sort of isomorphic relationship, and similar in some ways. But each of those organizations has to manage up and outward. And so keeping our leadership team informed was key to what we're doing. And then keeping our stakeholders in the field informed, constantly informed of the development that we were doing, both on the platform side but also on the content side. It's a bit of a challenge to manage this type of project from Washington. We have staff that are in some of the countries where we are working, but to make sure that we are showing up and being present in those countries can be a challenge. Another lesson I would point out that really something we did that really helped us both with this first lesson and this first challenge, but was to create an external board of advisors. And that external board, we pulled people from different sectors that would bring experience and expertise that we didn't have, or we had, but they certainly brought the gravitas to. And so we brought people from online learning, from financial services, from financial inclusion, and we created a board that had both internal and external advisors, and was really able to help us think through what we were doing in a different, and I would say a much broader way, and allowed us to be more creative. And then I would say the last thing is this idea of ensuring that we have a North Star on the project, ensuring that everyone is on the same page as to where we're going with our goals and outcomes, ensuring that everything we do is leading up to that. And we continually come back and remind ourselves that we are working to help learners, help staff and financial service providers who are working in financial inclusion to create products that are suitable for the poor. And we need to think about that end user constantly. So those are my 3 big lessons. Penina?
Thank you very much, Tom. I'll pass it over to you, Chris, to share with us what you've learned and what Humentum as a partner has learned through this consortium partnership. To you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Penina. Thank you, Tom. I'm going to pick up actually on the one that Tom was just talking about in terms of one lesson. So he was talking about, kind of having that shared goal and essentially, kind of constantly aiming towards that. And for us, of course, it's been financial inclusion and having that impact, as well as this goal of creating a sustainable entity. But I think one of the lessons here is it's as important to focus on the process as it is focusing on the outcome. And almost in some ways, by focusing on the process, trusting that the outcome will occur if you follow the sort of design principles that we kind of put in place for the project. And the reason for that is that the Agile process is specifically about learning. It's specifically about learning what works and what doesn't work, as Scott said. It's specifically about getting more intimate with your customer and understanding what their needs are going to be. And so if you focus on the process and then you focus on your learning, you're going to find out that actually some of your interim milestones may shift, even though you're still headed for that ultimate goal. And so, for example, one of the things that was really kind of important to this project at the beginning was we felt at the beginning that we were going to be building a pure two-sided marketplace where content providers could come and post their content on the platform, and financial service providers would come and essentially be able to kind of dip into a whole variety of content from different providers. And we learned early on in that process that, in fact, that's not what the customer actually wanted. The customer was looking to us to actually do a little bit of curation, looking to us to actually provide a little expertise in terms of what content was going to be there, how it was going to be organized, how are they going to access it, how it was going to be priced, etc. So we kind of moved away and said, look, we still are trying to build both sides of these markets, but we need to do it in a different way. And this kind of pure and open marketplace is not what we're going to move towards. We're going to move towards this curated digital platform. So that's just one example of where if we had stuck to the outcome, we may have missed a key learning insight. The second lesson learned is I'm going to talk about is the real value of data and a set of key performance indicators, KPIs, and agreeing those as a shared team and how they create accountability. Sometimes when you move to these more agile, more open, more transparent processes, there's sort of a subjective bias that, in fact, are we creating a situation where there's less accountability? And in this particular case, less accountability between the quote-unquote client, which is CGAP and Gateway Academy and the vendor, which is the consortium. And in fact, my experience is that actually we created greater accountability because from very early on, we collectively identified what were the key data points at each stage of the process. How did we make those goals and those those key metrics transparent to everybody in the team? And then how do we bring data out of the project so that everybody knew that we were moving towards those goals? And then at appropriate places, set new KPIs because the process was changing. We were at a different phase in the project. And I think this team collectively has done that really well. And as Scott mentioned earlier, when you have those shared KPIs, not only does it create shared accountability, it allows us to sort of focus on the problem and not on the people. Because if we're not hitting a specific target for something that we set, it allows us to sort of dig in and say, okay, where is that happening? Where are we breaking down our relationship with the customer? Where is the technology maybe not doing what it needs to do? And brings us back to identifying those kinds of situations. So I think those two things, focusing on the process and developing a really strong set of transparent shared KPIs are two lessons that I brought from this project. Thank you, Penina.
Thanks a lot, Chris. And over to you, Scott. If you'd speak a little bit more about some of the insights around culture and the people-related elements of the project, what are some key takeaways you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, what has stood out the most about this project is I think it's really underscored the insight that, building a project culture and the non-technical components of the project are always more important than the technical. Like, I feel like we were able to deliver on the technical, but the complexities, particularly in this project, was not about that. It was about almost everything else around that. And creating a culture where we could ebb and flow with the different customer needs, different requirements that were coming from our customers, both the training service providers and the financial service providers. And I think the more you can focus on creating an environment where you can have those conversations and you can talk about the learning in a meaningful way and build on top of that, the more impactful your projects are going to be. You can do anything with technology. You can build any new feature. You can change features. But if there's an environment where there's not that trust and transparency, it almost won't matter because any feature you build might not necessarily meet the requirements of your customers. And so I think just, we've said it a number of times, but I really do think that focusing on building a true partnership at the cultural level in a project will mean that your technical outcomes are orders of magnitude greater. So I think that's the key learning that has stood out for me.
Thank you again. So I would like to recap by highlighting what we've heard from our panelists around planning for capacity building initiatives using new technologies that present quite some unique approaches, some challenges, as well as some learning curves. We've heard that for a consortium partnership to work, there are some essential ingredients, obviously shared goals and the culture element that they also just spoke about, engaging with creative partners and enabling that collaborative project culture. I'm sure this presentation and the insights they've shared have ignited also some questions. And I will now want to invite you again to please keep your questions coming via the chat. I would like to start with Mary's question, and I'll direct this to you, Tom. What did it take for the World Bank to become comfortable with this kind of process, the competitive dialogue process, and what kinds of reporting have helped? That's to you, Tom.
Thanks, Penina, and thank you, Mary, for the question. So I'll answer it in the way it was asked, and then I'll add a little bit more context around it. But so from the World Bank perspective, so as we've said, CGAP is housed at the World Bank, and that means that we are in the World Bank structure. We're World Bank employees, and we have World Bank procurement as a way of procuring contracts and all of that. And so we do sit squarely within that and have to abide by the procurement rules. Having said that, the World Bank has really moved in a direction of being more adaptable and flexible, and it was corporate procurement who brought this particular mechanism to us and said, you should try this out. So we basically brought our problem to them And so this is what we want to do. And they said, well, here's one solution to get the partner that you need to do this. So I see a movement in the bank itself, in procurement, and in all sorts of other ways of being much more taking on adaptive management much more, of being much more focused on learning, and so that environment was key to us. Now, in terms of reporting, we have a monitoring, evaluation, and learning partner who creates quarterly learning reports for us, and we share that pretty broadly, and so that has also helped. But just a bit more about that, we're also looking not only at the World Bank, but then CGAP and CGAP's governance, and then our partners. So in the beginning, Panina mentioned that we're working with MasterCard Foundation on this. And so we've continually kept MasterCard Foundation in the loop. They have been part of our board of advisors. And so we have, in addition to sort of the routine project reporting that we do twice a year, we have them at our board meeting. We continually update them on what we're doing. And they have been really a great partner in terms of being flexible and adaptive, but also keeping us accountable to that North Star. So we said we were going to create a digital learning platform that supports financial inclusion, and that's what we're doing. But as Chris pointed out, often what we thought the steps to get there were not the way to do it, and so they have been a great partner also. And then finally, internally at CGAP, we report through our leadership team. And they have been supportive of what we've done. And so just continually, again, in addition to the sort of routine project reporting, just being intentional about keeping them informed has really been helpful.
Great, thank you, Tom. And Chris, I have a question for you from Carolina. And the question is about whether we're still looking for content. And Carolina, I can answer that the project is not yet complete. So Chris, would you please speak to her question around content needs?
Great. Yeah, thank you, Carolina, for the question. No, absolutely. As Panina said, the project is not complete, and you know, the goal, as we said, is for this thing ultimately to move from project status to being a self-sustaining entity, being its own platform and organization in the long run. So in that sense, it may never be complete. And so yes, we are still looking for content. We've got content from a number of providers already on the platform. We've got some additional courses that are in development, and we're constantly, you know, really looking for that match of really understanding the needs of the customer and the expertise that's available in the provider side of the market. You know, as Tom said, early on there was a demand study that was completed long before actually even the consortium got involved. And what we're really, you know, continually trying to do is, you know, use that as a baseline, but use direct engagement with the financial service institutions and others who are working with those institutions really closely to further refine and kind of hone what those needs are. Because the demand study was painted, the demand was quite a broad brush, and we feel like to really be viable now in the market, we really need to understand what are the specific needs that, you know, customers are willing to pay for now, and move that ahead. And you know, I think one of the things that we that I'm not sure we kind of covered in a whole lot of depth at the beginning is that one of the other key insights really early on in this process is that the best way to solve this problem right now was, you know, is essentially through an organizational learning approach, a B2B approach. So we're really working directly with, you know, management teams, human resource teams, learning teams within the financial institutions to really understand where they want to invest in their human capital that's going to help make them more effective at delivering financial inclusion, financial service products for the poor, as Tom said. So we're really always on the lookout for good content that's going to help us do that. So that was a bit of a long answer. I could have just said yes, but I wanted to give you a little bit more context as what we're looking for there. So great question, and thank you, Carolina.
Well, thank you for that, Chris. And I have a question for you, Scott, which has to do about the brand and how Get Academy has presented itself to the market. And the question is, with the 4 organizations being involved, how have you approach the idea of branding and presenting one brand and avoiding any kind of confusion that may emerge due to the different partners?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we did was, begin by building a brand for the project around Gateway Academy. But then we started to do additional things to really make it seem like we were a company. So we started building our own branding collateral. So we have business cards for Gateway Academy, we have emails for Gateway Academy. And so when we're representing Gateway Academy, we are then able to present ourselves as part of this entity and showcase the fact that we're all part of one unified brand. And I mean, I think part of it is just, accepting that your particular brand in this project doesn't matter. It's about achieving the goals of the project and, really trying to embody that sense of one team and then projecting that. I mean, it gets tricky sometimes when different emails come from different places, but that's been our goal, and we've been trying to build that into the process.
Thank you very much, Scott. We have another question from Jen, and Jen asks about this, and I'll send this again to you, Scott. As you put the user experience at the center of your process, how are you able to engage with the user audience in an ongoing and meaningful way?
Yeah, so I guess a number of different ways. We kind of have had more intensive deep dives with some of the users. So we went to Tanzania and ran a week-long design sprint with an FSP partner and a number of other stakeholders to really do a deep dive into what are the functionalities, what are the features, how can we adapt this product to meet the needs of the market. So that's kind of more intensive, but that's less ongoing. But then as part of the process of just taking the course, learners complete a pre and post assessment of the course. They're giving us feedback there. And we also have analytics on the platform giving us insights into what people are doing on the platform on a regular basis, as well as there's kind of a chat and help function. So if people are lost or confused or have feedback that they want to send us, they can do that there. And periodically, we'll have interviews and focus groups and kind of more intermittent touch points where we collect feedback from users. So it's kind of a mix, I guess, if that makes sense. So there's some deeper dives at longer periodicity, and then kind of more analytics and stuff happening in the background to give us a constant sense of what's going on. Back to you, Panina, I guess.
Yeah, I wonder if Panina might be muted.
It looks like maybe Panina got kicked out of the WebEx. I think we should manage ourselves here and listen
we can do that.
To see if there's any other questions. Yeah, I don't see any other questions in there.
There's one other question, Chris. I'm seeing that Panina put it in the chat to me. Before she must have gotten kicked off. So, and I'm just reading this for the first time. So, co-creation seems to be the foundation and theme coming through. What are the essential drivers that we can use beyond Gateway Academy? And this comes from my colleague Herat. And that's a very interesting question. I think in many ways, CGAP approaches our work in this manner all the time. But I would say, we continue to talk about co-creation, and I think that is important. Another concept for us, though, that has also become important is co-curation, and that is not only are you creating with your partner, but they're also giving you the content and steering and really helping in the direction of where it goes. And I think that's been key for us also. So both co-creation and co-curation. And other ways that we can use it beyond Gateway Academy, I think it will depend on the type of project, the type of work that people are doing. But what we really would like to do is document what we have done and allow people to take it in different directions. I will say it requires being a bit vulnerable. When we first did this co-creation workshop, it was a bit challenging because we didn't know exactly what we wanted Gateway Academy to look like. And we put it out there and we said, this is the end goal. How do you all see it? And many people really flocked to that and were able to be creative. Some people didn't. Some people were not quite sure of what to make of all of that. But I do think it requires a mindset that's adaptive to that. I don't know, Chris is going to do anything else. Oh, hey, Penina.
Thank you, Tom. I'm sorry about the hiccup, but I'm back in. Go ahead, Chris, if you had a response to that.
No, I was just going to say I did notice that there was another question that had come in, and you're back now, Penina, so maybe you can help us. Looks like Chris Cerwanka also put a question there, which I'm happy to start on, Tom. It's about distribution partners. Is there interest on the part of Gateway Academy for collaboration with distribution partners, i.e. financial inclusion sector stakeholders who can help drive demand and supply side progress, consultants, fintechs, TA providers, ecosystem enablers, et cetera? So maybe I can start, Tom, and if you want to add something to it. I think this is something that there is interest, Chris, and we haven't quite gotten there yet. But I think we're keenly aware that there are others who have, especially on the demand side, have access to collections of institutions, and maybe providing kind of compatible or adjacent products and services where a collaboration between us and those partners might help us kind of scale up our reach more quickly. We haven't quite kind of entered into that situation yet, but it's certainly something we've been talking about strategically. And I don't know, Tom, if any way you want to sort of shape that response a little bit more.
Yeah, I think you said it well, and I would just add that we were pushed by our board, stretched by our board to think differently, and as I mentioned, but very recently, 2 weeks ago, and I think we all agree that we want to do that, but we also are really right now focused on getting our core business model right. So it's sort of both. We want to begin to experiment with some different models and different ways of doing things, but we're still working on that core business model. Penina, are you still there?
Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we had one last question, and that's coming from Chris. And the question is around incentives for partners. Scott, are you in a position to speak to that?
Sure. I think that might have been a follow-up to the previous question in terms of for those distribution partners, can there be shared incentives for that? And I would just kind of echo what Tom and Chris had mentioned, in as much as I think it's something we're exploring. I think we're looking at how we can kind of expand our reach into markets and understand how we can do that in support of our business model. And so I think it's something we're open to discussing, but I think as Tom and Chris mentioned, it's something that we're focusing on likely subsequent to further validating our current business model.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for all the questions we've received and for your engagement. I would like now to direct you to some of the resources within the Gateway Academy website. First, I invite you to the website and to take a tour of the platform. And the website is Gateway Academy. And when you get to it, take a tour. And also I want to invite you to reach out to us.